section. So for the sake of the recording, I'll say once again, welcome. It is Monday night, I think, May 6th, and this is React Fundamentals. It's a 90-minute session, so hopefully you can all stay for the long haul. If you can't, that's fine. If you have to leave, go ahead. I certainly understand. This will be recorded and hopefully then posted to the instructor channel, or the student app, excuse me, unless everything goes terribly wrong, in which case I'll just burn it and try again later. Just kidding. So with that, just as an introduction, I'm Howard. For those of you who don't know, I think you all do know me, or if you don't, I'm Howard. Doesn't matter, I'm Howard either way. And please ask questions throughout this study group, throughout this lecture. The more you ask questions, the richer it will be now for the people here, for yourself, and for people in the future. So you can only make things better by asking questions. And the worst thing I'll ever say to a question that you ask is, here's what that is, but it's not relevant to what we're talking about now. And you can reach out to me sort of later. Like, for example, Redux. We're not going to talk about Redux tonight. So that's something that I would sort of put off till later. But questions. No question is too small or too big. No question is dumb. If you have a question, someone else has it. So please, I implore you, ask questions. Okay, so this is React Fundamentals. And let me talk a little bit about what this is and what it isn't in terms of a study group and in terms of objectives. This is not exactly going to be intro to React. If you are just at the beginning of React, stay, don't go run away. This is still hopefully going to be valuable for you. The idea is, though, this is going to be more hands-on application study group where we talk about the React fundamentals and then we look at them in a similar way to how we're going to build them sort of on our real live apps and in our final projects. We're not so much going to worry about styling, so nothing's going to look too pretty at the end of the night tonight with what we build. But the idea is that I really want you to understand is that the main parts of React, how it flows, how we think about where to put components, where to put state, and where to put our event handlers and that kind of thing. That's kind of what I want to focus on. I do want to make sure we will visit some of the key definitions. We'll definitely talk about components, props, state, virtual DOM. We're going to review those concepts and those topics. We're not going to use React.createElement. We're not going to talk about like Webpack and sort of the core fundamentals underlying that stuff. We're going to focus more on like the stuff that you use to actually build in React once you sort of get past the intro. By the way, if you're not talking, please mute your mic. But then when you do need to talk, by all means, obviously unmute it. We're going to use JSX, and if you're not familiar with JSX yet, that's okay. We'll do a sort of a brief intro as to what it is and just kind of run with it. We're not going to use, like I said, React.createElement or anything like that. Cool. Any questions about that? Does anyone have any questions about like what I just said or exactly what I meant by anything I just said? I'm never offended by questions. I love questions. Okay. By the way, if you really...
I have a question.
What's up?
All right. I still focus on props because I know that with the flow, you're going from your parent to your children. Mm-hmm. But what always trips me up is the props really seem to be the props of the children that you're just setting or defining in your parent that the children can use. Is that, am I correct in that?
Yep.
Because when I'm thinking about props, I'm kind of get stuck at the parent when I really should think about what my child properties are. Yep. And then define from the parent that they flow to the child. Is that
exactly? Yeah. Props usually start as state somewhere, but as soon as they're passed, they're props. And so any children component that are going to receive props, we're going to consider those props. We're going to think of those props as immutable. We're not going to change them from the children. Whoever owns the state, wherever those props come from, that's the component that's going to be allowed to change. So that's a great question, and that's something that we will see here as we go forward. So we're going to start with a little bit of an introduction. Oh, I haven't even shared my screen yet. So I don't have a ton of boilerplate. I don't have a slideshow. Instead, we're going to focus on defining some terms and hit the ground running and build something. That's the goal tonight. Okay. So please help me out. This is participation mandatory. Just kidding, but encouraged. So if you even want to like give it your best shot as far as definitions, talking about concepts, I encourage you to do that to the extent that you're willing. Of course, there's no requirement. So what in the world, first of all, is React? What is it?
It's a JavaScript library.
It is a JavaScript library, 100%.
That allows one to render UI.
Okay, render UI. Yes, exactly. We build a user interface. That's for those, I think you all know that. UI stands for user interface. We can build a user interface that users can interact with. Great, Sally, this is a great start. Where would I go if I wanted to answer that question? I wasn't sure, like, what is React?
The React docs.
Yeah, React, and you knew I was going to say that. I love the React docs. I think they're great. And there it is. Sally, did you cheat? It's not even cheating. This is perfect. A JavaScript library for building.
Before, and I need to kind of constantly reemphasize everything so I remember it.
There it is. Okay, it's a JavaScript library for building user interface. It's apparently, and this is just looking at reactjs.org, which is the official React website. Awesome. You should all be like, yeah, I know, I go here every day, because you should go here every day. Tremendous documentation. As I mentioned, please mute your mic if you're not asking a question or talking. So it's declarative, it's component based. Apparently we can learn once and write anywhere. This is all great news. We get some examples right off the bat with React docs. And so that's exactly what it is. What is React? It's a JavaScript library that we can use to build interactive user interfaces, which is cool. So let's talk about some of the key concepts and definitions within React. The first thing I wrote here is virtual DOM. What in the world is virtual DOM?
So coming out of JavaScript, we were dealing with the document object model. Mm-hmm. So it relates to that in some way.
Yes.
But it's updated automatically and in a certain sequence where you're not having to physically or manually update the DOM. It's doing it for you in React.
Okay, good. Yes, DOM and React will update the DOM for you. That's certainly true. We'll update the DOM for you. So let's pause a minute and talk about what is the DOM. What is the DOM? What does that even mean?
It means document object model.
Yes. And what is that?
That is the actual user interface, how things change in regard to what the user sees on the front end. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a representation of what? The DOM is actually a representation of something. What is it a representation?
All the HTML and CSS.
Yes. Oh, you guys are great. Okay, so let me open. Where can I see? Oh my gosh, I'm giving away answers here. Where can I see this DOM? This thing.
Go to your Chrome developer tools.
Yes. Exactly. Go to my Chrome developer tools. 100% right. So oops, I keep opening and closing them. Let's keep them open for a moment and. By the way, tell me if you can't see something, if it's not big enough, if I'm not loud enough. You guys, I don't know if you can't see or hear something, so please don't be sad. Okay, so how can I see the DOM?
You can go to Elements.
Yes, I can.
And that's
the DOM. Absolutely. Yeah. This is it. I can type in document. Oops, this is the DOM. Whoops, maybe. There it is, right? It's got HTML tags. This looks an awful lot like, as I think it was Sally mentioned, HTML. But it's not HTML. HTML is a string, right? It's a string with tags in it. HTML itself, like raw HTML. The DOM is a representation, the document object model. It's a representation of that HTML that is abstracted and available for use for programs like JavaScript, programming languages like JavaScript, right? So now I can interact with this thing as though it were an object. These things, if I say document, and I type in dot, I now have all these, look at all this, I've got properties and methods, right? I can like add event listener, right? That's a method I can invoke. I'll click listener so that like it's going to just, do something silly like console log hello or something, I don't know. So now I'm interacting with this DOM, I've added an event, and now every time I click anywhere on this page, I get hello, right? So I've interacted with this DOM. HTML is sort of our base layer. The DOM is an abstraction over that HTML that we can interact with. Now, what's the virtual DOM? What's the virtual DOM?
I think that what I understand is that the virtual DOM is like a creation within React, and React uses the virtual DOM to compare it to the actual DOM that's being manipulated by the user. And once there are any differences between the two, causes a change of the state.
Yes, beautiful. Brittany, that was wonderful. That was so good. So the DOM itself is an abstraction of the HTML into an object that can be manipulated and dealt with. The virtual DOM is just that. It's another abstraction. It's another level of abstraction over the DOM itself. And as Brittany just said, React can kind of look and see and be more surgical about the changes that need to be made. So we have the HTML, then the DOM, then the virtual DOM. Now, the DOM is this kind of weird node-like structured object-looking thing that has these, like, I can open and close these weird-looking things, whatever. It's got these tags. What about the virtual DOM? What else can we say about the virtual DOM? Brittany, I love everything you said about it, by the way. But in terms of data structures and languages, what is it?
Bunch of nodes.
So I'll say the DOM is a bunch of nodes. The virtual, and you could say it's a bunch of nodes, but the virtual DOM is really a big old JavaScript object. It's a JavaScript object that represents how the DOM should look, right? And the DOM represents how the HTML should look, right? Kind of thing. Does that make sense? So we're sort of pulling this all and say, let's translate this whole thing into JavaScript. And now we have a JavaScript object. We can change the JavaScript object, and React is going to allow changes to that thing. And then that will we can update then what the user sees. So we'll say the virtual DOM. DOM is a JavaScript object that represents the DOM. And so a node like, and by the way, I didn't say this, but I wrote a node structured tree-like object that represents the HTML. And can be interacted with by programming languages. And this can be interacted with by us React developers, which is also, of course, it's kind of saying the same thing. That's okay, and in a slightly different way. Cool. So let's talk about components. And I'm kind of skipping a section. By the way, I mentioned kind of like what this lecture is not. We're not going to get into Webpack. We're not going to get into React.createElement, pre-JSX stuff. We're going to kind of focus on like how we're going to use it. So if you haven't gotten into React yet and you're seeing this stuff and you get into the lessons, you're like, wait a minute, what about React.createElement? And then there's the children and all this stuff. Yes, you need to go through that, learn that kind of stuff. Here, I wanted to focus more on application. So we're kind of skimming through. I just want to point out in terms of like, this is not step in the door to React and this is all you need to learn. This is skimming over some of the basics so that we can get into looking at what it looks like once we're up and running. So just kind of pointing that out again in terms of this particular lecture. Okay, component. What do I mean by component?
So I think of separation of concerns or separation of the different pieces of your project.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that's and like that's really it. Like so somebody give me a website. Any website at all that's appropriate for us right now.
You can try Yahoo.
Yahoo. Does that still exist? It does, right? Okay. So and in terms of thinking about components, we still kind of think, somebody said like node, like tree, like I kind of, if I was going to look at this thing and try and think of this thing in terms of React, I see like maybe a nav component up here at the top and like a main container. I don't think I guess I can't really like select this whole thing. Can I not draw a square? I guess I could use my annotation. So like draw squares. There we go. Okay, so maybe this is maybe that's a nav component, and then this whole entire thing is a big old container component. And within this container component, there's like this big show thingamajig, and then there's this guy. So we're basically, like Kevin said, we're breaking this apart into pieces. And each little thing that you see might be a component. We might be able to turn this or build a component out of this thing. And so just like the DOM, we think in terms of breaking this thing apart into pieces, into components. Oh wow, that doesn't help on this page, does it? So so in terms of a component is basically, my computer just froze. Oh, never mind. I'm still trying to annotate. Okay, so a component is just like a React representation of some piece of UI, right? Some piece of the user interface. Representation, okay, of some piece of user interface, right? So it's basically a chunk of React stuff, right? And we can kind of walk through. It says React components implement a render method, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is getting a little bit more into it. But a component is some representation. It could be a giant container that's like contains the entire application, or it could be some tiny little chunk somewhere, or anything in between, right? So I have these other two keywords here, not keywords, but vocabulary terms: class component and functional component. What is a class component versus a functional component?
So a class component is more complex than a functional, I think, and it can also contain state.
Okay. Putting an asterisk there. That asterisk isn't very good. Maybe I'll put two. Oh no, this is markdown. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'll just put it anyway. So I'm going to put a line here. What else can we say about a class component? Like, don't think too much into it. What is a class component? It's a component that is written as
a class. As a class.
As a class. A component is written as a JS class. Okay, that's it. Like that. This is really, so this first, that really is what makes it a class component. If it's written as a class, it's a class component. Now, what Kevin said is usually true, probably more complex and can contain state. I put an asterisk there. Probably most of you know the reason why, but I'm going to leave it there for now. And we'll talk about it in just a moment after we talk about functional components. So can contain state. What other sort of important thing do we often see in class components?
They render and return.
Okay, so I'll say it must have what? How they render meaning they need what method? What they're required to have what method?
A render method.
Must have a render method. Okay, they have to. That's a requirement. React will tell you there's a problem if you don't in a class component. And what was I going to write here? Can take advantage of what? So besides state and besides having to have a render method, what other feature can we take advantage of in class components?
Props.
Yes, but any component can have props. Class, functional, any component can have props.
Life cycle?
Life cycle methods. So what makes a class component different from a functional component is that it can have state, although there's an asterisk there, which because that's not always true anymore. But they can take advantage of lifecycle methods, and they must have a render method. So if you look at line 20, and even if you've never heard of this before, if you see that a class component is a component that's written as a JavaScript class, can anyone guess, even if you've never heard of it before, what a functional component is?
It could be written like just with a const.
It's just a function. It's not a class designation.
So yes. So Sally, right? It could be written as a function rather than a class. And Kevin, you said const, and I pause on that for a moment because, we're going to come back to that. I'm going to make a point about that because we typically use const, and const is usually the way to go, right? we stick to the single responsibility principle. We stick to this principle of least visibility and least mutability, meaning we start with things that are as invisible as possible and as unchangeable as possible, and const fits the bill, and const is usually going to be the way to go. But you don't have to use a variable. You don't have to use a const. You could simply have a function and have that return as a React component as well. And I just want to make that distinction because one of the hard parts about learning React is like all the terminology, and then also like all the convention that's required versus what's not required, and which is just handy. And so that's one of those things that's a convention, but it's not required. You could use just the function keyword to declare a function, and that could still be returned as a React component. Yes. Does that make? I'm just making that distinction there. Does that make sense? Does it not make sense? I guess is more important. Does it maybe make sense? I don't know. So, but this is what makes it a functional component a functional component. Okay, is that it's written as a JavaScript function. Would be an arrow function, which of course means that then it must be a variable of some sort, which means probably const, right? Which means in all likelihood, I don't know how you spell it. How about, which probably means const. Okay. Oh my gosh, it's 7:55. Oh no, we start at 7:30, right? Okay. Could be an arrow function. Could also be a function declaration. Could also be another, a function expression using the keyword function. So I'll just say could be a function expression, arrow function, and in either case, this probably means const or function. So in either case, we'd probably use const, or it could be a function declaration. We don't need to do this. Like again, principle of least visibility. Why declare a function that's available everywhere, or even at a larger scope when it's not necessary? Although if you declare a function in a single file and we only import it, export it, I don't even know if it would make much difference. Okay, so class component can have state. A functional component, we used to be.
Sorry, a short question.
Yep.
When you say could be a function declaration, isn't it like repetitious to what you wrote in the previous line, or function?
So I'm sorry, this qualifier here, you're right, this is poorly written. When I say it could be a function expression, the qualifier here is that that function expression could be defined as an arrow function, or using I can't spell either, using the function keyword. Is that helpful? That's what I mean. So in other words.
Yeah, but is that the same as function declaration using the function keyword?
Is that the same? Help me out here. I know somebody, I hope I grilled somebody during their JavaScript assessment enough to help us out here.
Well, maybe one's an anonymous function and then one is a name function.
Okay, so an expression could be anonymous or named, but what's the difference between a function declaration and a function expression?
Oh, for sure. Function expression is you're saying it is equal to something, const,
yes.
Whatever, yeah.
Yes, function expressions appear basically anywhere that any other value or any other expression could appear. A function declaration begins the line of code with the keyword function and is named. Mm-hmm. There's a big difference between those two things, right?
Sure.
As soon as you wrap, you could also wrap a function in parentheses, even if it starts the line of code. If the parentheses starts the line of code, that becomes an expression rather than a declaration. Yep. Big difference in terms of scope, right?
Yep.
Good. So that's the difference there. Good question though. Great question. And I didn't have that written very well at all. It's still maybe not great, but that's okay. I'm going to say, used to be that functional components could not have state. Now they can with hooks. We're not going to talk about hooks tonight either. So that's another thing that's sort of not on the table for tonight, for now. But this has changed. So hooks have changed, which is why that there's this asterisk here. So I'll put that there.
Howard, I know we're not supposed to use hooks, but can you explain what generally what are hooks? Are they like macros of things, or?
Kinda. So hooks allow us to allow you to use a functional component. And so there's a couple of functions that are now available in React that you can import, like use state and use effect. And they're written in a particular style where you can declare an initial state and basically an updating function. And you can then declare state inside of a functional component. And you now have access to a piece of state of some sort within that functional component. That's the gist of what hooks are. There's a great, when hooks were released, they released it at ReactConf last year, I think. And you can watch the introduction video straight from Dan and Sophie, the two React devs who introduced hooks to the world. And it's really, it's like, if you have questions about hooks, just watch that. Like, watch it from the source, right? They do a nice job talking about it and explaining and giving some examples. So I highly recommend that. If you just Google like ReactConf hooks, I'm sure it's probably the first. In fact, we could just look, like, it's probably the first thing that comes up. YouTube ReactConf hooks. I bet it's there. Come on, big money. Well, it took a while, but there it is. So 250,000, not even 300,000 views. Surprising. So, but this is it. This is the one I'm talking about. And you can skip through like all the other blah, blah, blah and get to where Dan brings out hooks. I think it's Dan. It's either Dan or Sophie who introduced. I say that as if I know those people. I don't, but I really, Dan Abramov, if you don't know, is the author of Redux, and he's a React developer, and he's put out a lot of demos and a lot of sort of approachable demonstrations and stuff that are available. Cool. Yeah, so that's about as much as we'll talk about hooks today, but I do need to include that as a sort of this asterisk here. Can contain state, and I'll put in parentheses, used to be only class components had state. Okay. And by the way, we're not talking about Redux tonight, so when we talk about state, we are talking about React state, and state as it lives and as it is within React. We're not going to raise it to the level of using a global state management tool such as Redux. This is like after you learn the basics, before you learn Redux, this is React. That's what we're talking about tonight. Now, notice that I've got container versus presentational components separate from where we talk about class and component, class and functional component. We can define these things, and they really mean something. It's sort of a strict definition. These two have kind of more of a loose definition, container versus presentational. Does anyone want to take a stab at like describing the difference between container and presentational components, sort of loosely at least?
Containers actually do something.
Okay, yeah.
With data, change state can change, whatever. Presentation is strictly just, here's what you see based on what the parent has passed through to that presentational. So you can reuse the same presentational piece and with different components based on different sources of data.
I'll say could. They could do, so yeah, I think that all sounds about right. So they could do something, they could hold state, they could hold other components, they could use life cycles, maybe routers, maybe routes, that kind of thing. And this is, by the way, a very loosey-goosey definition that we're talking about here. Presentational, as Sally mentioned, components take props and show them. Like, they're designed to demonstrate, to show something, and that's it. Like, they're not going to be smart. They're not going to have, we might have callbacks that we pass down for particular things that happen to them. But they're not going to have their own sort of change functions and that kind of thing. Generally speaking, these are not hard and fast definitions by any means. So keep that in mind. This is just kind of a distinction that we tend to use. And I think in the project, you're required to have X number of container components and X number of presentational components, which will be expected to be functional components. Presentational components, take props, show them. Usually these are functional components. Functional components. Okay. All right. So now JSX, the last thing that I want to talk about before we kind of get rolling into the code. What is JSX?
It's like a mix of HTML and JavaScript.
That's exactly right. Okay, it's like a mix of, and I'll throw HTML in there as well too, right? It's or more like XML almost. So it's kind of like XML, HTML, component, JS. I should say probably more like XML component. So it's kind of like this new syntax where some component, right? And this can this can say like, I don't know, some component gets props equals the props, whatever. This is terrible, but whatever, whatever. The idea is like, it's going to look something like this. That's all I'm trying to say. This would be the name of the component. I can pass whatever I want, and props we're going to pass kind of like arguments, and they look like HTML attributes. This whole thing kind of has an HTML feel. It could even like look more like HTML, or even be sort of raw HTML. I could have a header, hello. This is just like a demo of what JSX might look like. And then curly brackets mean what?
It means JavaScript code can go in there.
Yes, execute me, curlies mean execute me as JS. This wasn't written very well. Curlies, how about just saying it right? Curly brackets indicate code here is executed as JS. Okay, cool. That's right. Okay, any questions about sort of the path we've laid out here, some of these core topics, any other topics that are in your mind, like, wait, we didn't mention this, or we didn't talk about that, or anything on your mind, any questions currently at this moment in time before we spring into action? Wow. So either I'm super confusing or super clear. Or something in between. I don't know.
Sorry to ask a question that
No,
might be
please.
basic. Can you go over what XML is? I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Good. Forget it. No, I'm just kidding. XML is a maybe less used syntax. It looks kind of like HTML, but is more free. And so an example of XML, and I'm just going to literally go right to W3 School's Intro to XML. Basically, imagine you could have a markdown language where you choose whatever tags you want, right? So like, notice that there's note to, from, heading, body, note, blah, 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 right? So we can define what the tags are and how they work in the document structure, as opposed to like HTML, which is, we all have the rules about what the HTML elements that we can use. XML is much more loose. We can do whatever we want with it, and it looks a lot like HTML. It was commonly used maybe more, I want to say in the 90s and like early thousands, and just kind of fell off. The term AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML, was coined back when XML was popular. None of you have probably ever used XML. Like, it really should be AJAG, right? Asynchronous JavaScript and JSON formatted stuff, and JavaScript, asynchronous JavaScript and JavaScript, right? Because that's what you use it for. Or AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and HTML, right? We don't really use XML, but AJAX is just cooler sounding, right? And it felt better. So that acronym has survived as the acronym for talking about sending asynchronous web requests, even though, or asynchronous server requests, even though nobody uses it anymore. So that's what XML is. It's like old school stuff that it's like free written HTML with any tags you want. It's about the best way I can describe it.
Thanks.
Great question though. Yeah, because who would, if you don't know what XML, like, if you don't know what it is, why would you know, right? And you wouldn't use it, I don't think, anymore. I don't know who uses XML anymore, other than for the term AJAX. Okay, so now I need some audience participation. I need a domain. I didn't pick one. I didn't build one. You're going to give me one. We're going to make one. I need a domain of some sort.
Oh, like the name of an app?
Yeah, some topic, something we can build around.
We can build a cat Tinder.
Cat Tinder. Okay. I like it. That's where we're going with this. Cat Tinder. We got to keep it PG. But
yeah, for cats.
Okay.
No, I
Okay,
did
so
one like that before.
Yeah. Okay. So cat Tinder. All right. So let's see. React. So I'm gonna use. Like I say, we're not gonna talk about sort of the fundamentals in terms of the creation from scratch. We're gonna go ahead and use like create React app, and we're gonna call it cat Tinder. I like it.
Howard, would you suggest or advise that we code along or just view it? And
I would not suggest you code along unless that's a style of learning that you know is really useful for you. The problem with coding along or writing notes along is that you spend as much time typing and trying to like, oh, what did he type? And I'm already on to something else. Whereas you can have this code, base once I'm done, you can watch the video. I think for most people, for most learning styles, that will be more effective than trying to type as I go. That's my opinion. That you know you better than I do in terms of learning styles, and if immediately typing what someone says sinks in better for you, and you can keep up, like because sometimes I talk fast and I do things fast, and I'll be switching back and forth. That's fine, but I think I'd recommend that you don't, and I will be happy to share everything I do tonight with the world. Okay.
thank you.
Yep. So while this loads, let's look for some sources for stuff because we're definitely gonna want like pictures and stuff, right? So free cat images maybe, free cat images. And then what we're gonna wanna do is talk about functionality. So I'm gonna type out a fire. And by the way, one other thing that we're not gonna do today is we're not gonna connect to a backend, which I probably should spend a moment to talk about. When you build a Rails application from the ground up, you could add JavaScript into your asset pipeline. And then you're running a single application on a single server, and your JavaScript lives and is shipped from your Rails to your front end. All great, right? All is good. You could separate your JavaScript into a separate application and run your Rails server and then run your JavaScript application and build like an adapter class or something, use object-oriented JavaScript to build out functionality that way too, if you wanted to. It's not a style that we really pushed, and you probably didn't do that for your Rails.js project, but you could have. And then React kind of takes that next step. Now we're going to separate our back end. Our Rails server is going to serve nothing but JSON data. And we're going to use component lifecycles to hit that. And then we're going to just have functions. We're going to describe fetch functions, or I should say functionality using fetch to hit that back end whenever appropriate based on our user input and our user interactions. We're going to avoid that today and just focus solely on React. We'll talk about like where those backend requests would live, and maybe we'll mock them up a little bit in terms of like what we do on the front end. So let's build something like a sort of a mini wireframe. And I use the term wireframe loosely. I highly recommend a better wireframe than we're about to do. I'm just going to call it wireframe. I'm not even going to use MD. Or maybe I should. So let's at least talk about, and let's kind of like sketch out what we want to do here. I'm going to open up, I'll open up a new website about blank. Okay. So let's at least kind of sketch out what are some of the basics in terms of components that we want to have on our, did I stop sharing?
Yeah, we just have you now.
No, boy, that's lame. There we go. I don't know how that happened. Sorry about that. Sometimes weird stuff happens in Zoom. Okay. So let's at least like think about some components that we would want. And like Kevin, I know this was your idea, but anyone could contribute. Like, let's think about what this thing should look like, and we can start thinking about components and what we will need. So let me grab my rectangles and let's talk about a layout here. So what do we want to be looking at here? Anyone? If I do this, what component does that look like to most people?
Container.
Yeah, in fact, like probably like app.js, right? Or I'll just say app as the container. So we'll say, yes, this is a big container, that's app, okay? So what else do we want to be looking at? Like somebody describe me, like what in the world is cat Tinder going to look like? What do we need to build?
You need to fetch cats.
Okay, so I'm gonna need to get the cats. Okay, sure. So that's more of like functionality wise, but what about in terms of, I'm talking about in terms of like visual and user interface. What does this need to look like? What do we need here?
You need a screen that shows multiple cats or a cat.
Okay, so does it multiple, like 2 or like any number, or how does this work?
I don't know how Tinder works, so.
Yeah, I'm not a Tinder. I was never a Tinder guy either. I made it out before Tinder hit the market. So somebody help. I literally need help here. What do I need to draw? What do we need to be looking at here?
Like a collection of some kind of multiple cat images with like a little profile blurb underneath.
Okay. So maybe I like that a little bigger. So a collection of images with like a bunch.
Yeah, like I'm gonna say 5.
Okay, so 5 cat images. And so to me, that feels like whenever we have a collection of like images, we need a container to hold them and then like a presentational version of each one. Okay. So maybe this is like cats. We'll say, let's see, text. Maybe this is cats. And maybe these are what, like cat cards?
Cat cards, yeah.
Okay. Okay, this is definitely a good start, right? We can start with this. Unfortunately, like I'm gonna have to like, I guess I'll do it this way. I'll capture this and then we'll come back to it. I should have, I don't know, I don't have a better tool for that than for right now, but this is okay. This will work for now. All right, so let's clear my drawings and let's think about what this looks like. So cool. So it looks like, did this work? Uh-oh, found incompatible. Oh boy. Let's see if this worked or not. Oh, apparently my computer's, oh, I keep thinking it's broken and I'm just still annotating. Okay. Uh-oh. Node. I thought I deleted everything. Annotate, clear all drawings. There we go. Okay. Why am I still annotating? Sorry. Okay.
When you create a new app, do you need to put npx before the create React app?
I should have it. What is it? npm install create React app? Maybe. That might have been it. I thought I had it all set up, but maybe not. All right, so we'll kind of think more about, even without that, what I'll do is I'll start sort of building this out anyway. Oh, cool, you got us Kevin got us a reference for what we might like there. So I'm just gonna call this source, even though it's gonna obviously change, so that we can kind of start coding while this is running, so I don't wanna wait for it. And inside of source, I'm gonna build a file called app.js and a file called cats.js and a file called catcard.js. And now, just to be clear, I'm putting these in a temporary file here. We will move them. Okay, let's just try it again. Create React app cat Tinder. Yeah, Susan, definitely don't get run over by a tornado. Goodness. Well, all right, we'll see if this, hopefully this works. Hopefully my computer's not broken, which it might be, it happens. So let's talk about, like, I think we'll put a pause on app because I want to kind of show you what Create React App gives us with that. But cat card and cats are things that, oh no. Let's see. Node V. Why is 911 not okay? Sorry, let's see. Well, I want to pause the recording for just a, not that, pause the recording for just a moment. All right, for the sake of the recording, basically I have taken a running React application instead of trying to mess with my packages for now, for the sake of time. And I've just cleaned out an existing very simple React app, which used to be, as you can see, a recipes app, but is now blank once again. And let me just make sure to get rid of all console logs and anything else. I don't think anything else is here that's important. Oops. Cool. Good. Good. Okay, so let's talk about the file structure that you would get. It's taken a while, huh? It's okay. Let's talk about the file structure that you will get. So you'll get basically something that looks like this. You'll get .git, .node modules, a public folder for images and things like that, a source folder, and this is where all the magic happens. You get your package JSON, package lock once you've installed, kind of like, you can think of this kind of like a gem file and a gemfile.lock. Very, very similar in terms of functionality, but for JavaScript packages rather than Ruby gems. CSS, React will give you some basic CSS, which you can choose to change as much as you want or as little as you want. You'll want to change it, actually. App.js is our main component that we get, and index.js is what actually calls React DOM.render. So index.js is kind of like where the magic happens. This code right here is what actually takes the React app or whatever the main container is that you call it. And notice some plain old vanilla JavaScript that interacts with the DOM. There it is, document.getElementById root. So the HTML that I have associated here must have a root, some element with an ID of root. Okay, and if we look inside of public, we can see there's index.html. And indeed, there's my div for root. So basically, we get this sort of blank version of what this thing's going to look like. And index.js kicks everything off, and app becomes, by default, our main container component. Cool. So this is now going to be our main cat app. And so let's think about the files. Like what do we think we ought to do with the folder structure here, knowing that we know we want a main app with at least a cats component and cat cards to add to that component? Any thoughts?
We could create something like mycats.js.
Yeah, and I think I would just call it cats, right? I think let's stick to similar as possible. In fact, actually, one thing I would like to do, I would like to, for the sake of good practice, let's create a components, containers. We could do this any number of ways. I'll say containers. How about components? Components. We'll create a components, and then like inside of components, a new folder for containers. Actually, we're not going to have that many, so we're just going to put everything inside of components. How's that? So I'll say cats.js. And we know we want a cat card.js. And that's enough to get us started. Another thing I'm going to do inside of source is put a new file called cats.js. I'll just say catsdata.js. And basically what this is going to do, we'll grab some information from the internet to mock up like our collection of data that we would get from the back end. Cool. So great. Component is not defined. This is a good start. Oops. App line 4. Oh, perfect. So what is this wonderful error that I'm getting? And I'm going to keep this open, by the way, even though I'm just going to delete this folder. So we now have this stuff. So we still have our notes. We still have our wireframe, although we really didn't draw it here. We drew it out elsewhere. But now within the folders that we have, why am I getting this error? And I'll show you what it said, and we can look. It says component is not defined on line 4. Class app extends component. So let's talk about, like, let's break this down, what's happening here. What's going on up here, by the way, with import? What's that all about?
Your first line, you're importing the whole React package into the file. And then CSS, you're importing the CSS styling from the app file.
Yeah, exactly. And remember that this is all JavaScript. So React must be some kind of JavaScript thing. And in fact, if I come over here, can I, oops, jeez, React. It's not defined, but what if I put a debugger right here? Okay, and I save that. First, I'm not going to get past this. So the reason is, so we can either use the syntax seen here, or I can import besides React, which is the default export from this file. I could also grab component, which says the component must be some property, some sort of subset of the main export here, some named export, I should say, from this file. So if I save that and I let this thing run again, I now have caught in the debugger. And let's look at what React is. What is, come on, computer, wake up. There we go. Is this too small? Okay. React is not defined. Oh, come on. Why not? Did I actually put a debugger here? I don't think so. Well, maybe.
Do you really need that comma after React on line 1?
Yes.
You do? Oh.
Yeah, I do. Let's see. Component. So I guess I don't have access to that. That's interesting. Okay. I was hoping I could actually just look at that. But let's see. What if I go back to my render method? Am I still caught in my render, or did I refresh?
Do you need a separate line on the first line, just saying import React from React in addition to the component?
No, I should be able to just do it this way. So let me just get rid of my debuggers for a moment, and let's just see if we get hello from our main app div. Let's just make sure we're tied up and running before we kind of do anything else, I guess. There it is. Okay, so we're up and running here. We have no access kind of like to exactly what's going on there unless we pause in a debugger or something. What if I console log React? There it is. So this is what I wanted to show you. So here's React. What is this thing? If you look at it, like, what does this thing look like in terms of data structures?
A JavaScript object.
It's a JavaScript object. That's exactly right. That's the point that I wanted to make. This is a JavaScript object, right? And like, that's all it really is. If we look here, we've got all kinds of cool stuff that we can do. There's component. This is exactly what component is. So this whole thing is a JavaScript object. And component is listed as a function here. But if I say, if I say something like class user, okay, I look at user. It does say class. I'm hoping it would say function. But remember, classes are basically fancy functions. So what we're doing here is when we look at, oops, sorry, I have this thing backward. I have to put this in the way that I like it, which is my Atom to my left of my Chrome. Sorry, otherwise I'm going to go back and forth all night. I apologize for that. Okay, so what we're basically doing here is using JavaScript's class inheritance pattern that's given to us to basically inherit from. So this class that we're going to export called app, extending React component. This is just JavaScript inheritance using class syntax. Basically, it means we're going to create this new object, this new class, and say I'm a class just like that. So I have all the stuff that this thing can do now I can do. Right? I inherit all of its properties in terms of like the functionality and everything I can do. And then we simply export it at the bottom of the file. Export default means this file we expect to export just one thing, and it's going to be this thing app. So this is what's coming out of this file. If I try to import something that doesn't exist, right? So if I wanted to say like, give me hot dog, for example. Hot dog from React, and I save that. I should get some kind of an error saying that that thing does not wasn't expecting an unexpected token. Fine. Do I have to do destructuring last? Maybe that's it. It's interesting. It's not the error I was expecting. Well, new errors are fun. Unexpected errors are fun. So that it's happy with that. What if I change this thing to hot dog? It should say something like, this thing does not have, oh, it didn't even mind. So hot dog would just be defined. So it actually does not throw an error that I'm trying to import something that doesn't exist. It just doesn't know now what React is. That's interesting. So basically hot dog would have been undefined there. What's that?
What if you had hot dog in your curly brackets like component?
Now it's going to tell me that there is no, that this thing does not have a named export, or React does not have a, okay, it's not going to tell me anything. It's fine, but never did.
Okay.
It's not going to tell me anything I thought it was. I bet you this is just going to be undefined then. So the reason for that is objects. Remember, so like if I create an object, right, and I create some empty object. If I say object dot beans, notice that I don't get an error. I just get undefined. So I do default properties that don't exist are just basically given a value of undefined rather than returning an error, and that's basically what's happening here. This property doesn't exist on the main export, so we just get undefined instead. Okay, but let's move along here so we can just do it this way. Okay, so I'm importing React. So for every file, what I want to point out here, for every file that we build inside of React, for every component we make, we need to import everything we need. So when you're using Rails and you're putting all your JavaScript in your asset pipeline, Rails is automatically going to basically concatenate all of your JavaScript and run it, right? Loading up all the functionality that you want, all the functionality that you need, you're going to have off the bat. Not so with React. With React, each file kind of stands on its own, and you need to import what you need and export what you want the rest of the world to be able to see. You could almost think of it like just as somewhat of a metaphor, like these are all your arguments that are coming in that you're specifying exactly where they come from, and this is kind of your output. Maybe that's not a very good comparison, but in terms of like, we don't have access to anything in any other file unless we import it. We don't have any, we can't give access to anything from inside of here unless we export it. That's what the way to think about it. So that's a big difference coming from like just a Rails app into a React application. But this is still just JavaScript. There's nothing special about React here other than the fact that this is JSX syntax, meaning it looks like HTML, but it's actually JSX. Notice that I don't need strings. I shouldn't say I don't need, I don't need quotes or anything else. And I could do something like, as we mentioned, I could say console log hello from JSX, curly brackets, which really means hello from JavaScript. And provided that I don't console log hot dog anymore, we should be okay. So then, so we get our little hello. That's the Swedish version. Just kidding. All right, so let's talk about cats. So this is going to be a container component. So what do I need here in order to build this file? Anyone?
Need to import the React package.
Yes, I do. Okay, that's like, you're going to see this line of code on every single React. This is the one and only line of code that's going to be common to every single React component that you build. If you don't need anything else, you need this. If for no other reason to return, to be able to use JSX on your return value. Cool.
Now you need to import app.
Do I?
No.
So what components do we need to import when we build any other particular import? Do we import our parents or do we import our children? Anyone?
Children.
We import our children.
Right.
So anything that's going to be a parent of this particular component, whatever we build here, we'll need to import it, but we don't need to import our parents. So for now, we should be good to go. So I'm going to say class. By the way, should this be a class or functional component?
Class.
I think it should be a class component. Why would that be?
You want to say state?
Yeah, I think this one's going to be stateful. Cats. We'll find out. Class cats extends React dot component. So we can use either syntax. We can either import components separately as a named export or as a named import, or we can do it this way. And now I simply have my function body. Okay. And personally, like, personally, I like to see this. What's the one thing I need inside of a class?
A render method.
A render method. And what does my render method need to return?
Something.
Exactly. So I'm going to say return hello. How about just a string? Let's see if that works. And we don't know if it works because this thing hasn't been tied up to anything yet.
Don't you have to export it to?
Yes, I have to export it. So I'm going to do I export default or just export?
Export defaults.
Yes. Why? Why is this a default export? Under what circumstance would I not use default? Let's look it up. So let's see if this blogs thing that came up first knows what they're talking about. Named exports are useful to export several values. During the import, one will be able to use the same name to refer to the corresponding value. To export default, there's a single default export per module. A default export can be a function, class, object, or anything else. And that's about right. So if we expect to have a list of exports from a particular file, then we're not going to use default. If we have one thing and one thing alone that we're going to export, then we can use default. Okay, that's basically it. If you're going to export multiple things, don't use default. If you're going to export just one thing, then we can use default. Okay.
Is that just a syntax check?
Yeah. And I could show you like.
If I can ask my question a little better, what I mean by that, why would you ever want to use default? If you're always gonna, does it mean that you're just gonna have one thing in there? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you have multiple, why wouldn't you just always use export?
Because for each of these components that I build, for every component file, I'm only going to export one thing. I could build multiple classes and export them from inside of here.
I'm sorry. So if you just had export cats, would it not just be the same as export default?
Right, but I'm saying this is the one. So no, it's not. So we can look at that difference actually. So let's see if I do. So first of all, I'm going to replace this thing with my cats. For now, just empty old cats. And I need to import it in order to do that. Import cats from, what is it? Components, cats, right? I think that's what it is. Let's just make sure that's working. There we are. Oops. Nope, wait, where'd it go? There it is. Okay. Parsing error. Okay. So, oops. So I think, okay, so notice the attempted import error. Components cats does not contain a default export, imported as cats. So let's see. Import cats from components cats is failing. So when we export default, we're saying I'm exporting this thing and it's named, right? I want this thing always to be called the thing that I'm exporting. And so actually, that's not exactly the best definition either, because I guess I could default export something that's anonymous as well and name it. So notice that when I import it in this measure, in this way, it's complaining to me. It's telling me like, I expect this thing, the way you're writing it, to be a default export. I don't know if that's helpful. Is that, I'm not sure if I'm doing a great job with this explanation here. But if basically anytime that I have a single class, that's the only thing I'm going to export. I do want it to be default. In fact, I believe I could even write it on this one line. Export default class cast. I'm not sure. Let's see if we can do that. Yeah, so I am allowed to do that as well. Basically, I'm saying this, when someone goes to import from this file, this is what they're getting. They're not getting anything else.
So would you always just have one class per JS file? Is that the standard practice?
You don't have to. You could have if you wanted to write everything in one file, you could put multiple files, multiple classes, multiple functions, whatever you're returning in one file, which as you get into Redux and you build your action creators, you are going to do that.
If I had another class in this file, how would I export multiple classes? You get rid of the default, and then you just say export cast, and if you had dog too?
Let's see. Unexpected token. Why am I getting? Where are we getting export class? What do we need to change then here? Import. All right, so it's the syntax basically, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, but the way that JavaScript is grabbing like imports is why I need, if these are named, so this is the answer to your question is, if I wanted to have multiple classes, right? If I want to export class user, right? Whatever. It's just, now I could grab that as a named export as well in my app.js. And now I'm grabbing user, right? As well. So I can grab these named exports, as many as I want from this particular file, if I don't use default. I don't think I can have a mix. Default export, export default. Yeah. Default, let's see if we can have a mix. Actually, I think we can. So like, and that's kind of what you're seeing here. Okay, so yeah. So basically what's happening is I can choose, I don't, like the default export is the thing that I'm grabbing and it should be named when I import it according to what I name it. I can have other named exports as well. In this case, like you're seeing that I have this other class down here and I can have as many components as I want down here. And I grab one of them as my main one. So it's a matter of the namespacing that we're pulling out here. I don't know if that's helpful.
It looks a bit similar to how you import React and component, right?
Yeah.
So if you want all of it, like React, you use an export default. If you use just one part, you just use the export. So you use the equivalent of component somehow. That's
basically it. And like whatever we export default, we can simply grab, whereas otherwise our named exports, we have to grab, we have to destructure this way if we want to reference them this way. It's a good question, but we're gonna kind of see if we can. Time flies. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, I'm not sure who asked it.
For the most part, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to go back to export default.
The reason for not importing React component is because it's a child.
Yeah, I can just refer to it this way. It's totally up to you. If you want to grab it as an import this way, you certainly can. And now what this does is it gives you access now to a variable within this file called component. So I could simply then refer to it directly rather than referring to it as a property of React, which it is.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's see. We're going back to app.js, and I should be now grabbing my cats container, And that is in fact what we see rendered there with hello. If we look at cats, that's all I have here. So I'm returning hello from my render method. But that's not exactly what I want to return, right? So I'm going to return something else. Now, you don't always have to wrap your return in a div, but in this case, I think I'm going to do that, at least for now. Oh, yeah, I don't have that package, do I? Okay. Now, when you return from React, or return from a render method needs to be either a single element, okay, so we can wrap the whole thing in a div and that counts as a single element, or I could use fragment if I wanted a collection, or I could return an array of elements. I'm going to go ahead and wrap everything inside of a div. And basically now I have to think about what my cat cards would look like, which means we need some dummy data. So let's see. Let's grab some free cat images. Great. Free cat stock photos. This is perfect. So let's see. I'm just going to just do this a few times here with my cat's data. Whoops. Copy image address. Copy image address. Just gathering up some data here. Whoops. And let's just at least get 5. Oh, that's too cute. Okay, so now I've got 5 of these things, and I'm just going to turn these into sort of objects. So let's see. Name Fluffy. Oops. Oh my goodness. Okay. So we'll give each of these at least a name and an image URL. Oops. And okay.
On row 2, you have a single quote to start and ended with a double quote on URL.
Thank you. Okay, give me some cat names.
Spike. Moose.
Perfect. Okay. And now, here we go again with our exporting. I'm going to export const cats. I think I need to do it this way. Const cats equals this array of cats. Export default cats. Okay, so now I can grab these cats from this file. Each one has a name and a URL. That's really kind of all we need for now. Oh, I need my comments, don't I? Whoops. Okay, cool. So now I've got my 5 cats, and basically what I'm going to do for now, I'm going to grab those things directly. So I'm going to say import cats from, where am I here? Source cats data. I guess I'm inside of source, right? Cats data. Let's see if that causes trouble. Let's just see if we see these. So every time you make a change, by the way, when you're developing, I highly recommend like just doing a quick double check that it's exactly what you want it to be. So right now, let's double check that our cats objects works. Okay, great. So now it can't resolve cats data in our components. That's because I'm inside of here and I need to go up a level, right? Cool. So there's our cats. There they are. That looks good. Okay. So, and as you're developing in React as well, like that's good advice. Like every time you make a change, make sure you're still rendering. If you're not rendering, don't ignore it and try and like build on top of that. Instead, go back and see what's going on. Okay. So now what? Help me out here. What else do we need to do to keep building out Cat's Tinder here? We've got to, basically we know this is going to be a container component. And I know that I want this thing, cat card, to be the thing that we're rendering a bunch of. So I could start with some boilerplate, import React from React. And now what? So this is the parent, this is the child.
I was just going to say, maybe you can iterate over your collection of cats, and from each of those create a cat card component with the image as the URL.
I think that's a good idea. Well, yeah, and I think I actually want to pass I want to pass the name and the URL to each of these things. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. So let's say cats.map, and basically we're going to map for each cat. I'm gonna make one of these cat cards. And here's where we're talking about, we're kind of getting back into a discussion about props and state. So I have this information, cats, but right now, I mean, this is kind of like, let's actually kind of consider that this is not sort of available as it is, even though it is, right? Basically what I mean is, let's actually turn this thing into state. How can I turn this into state? I don't want to be able to do this. I want to say state of some sort. So what would that look like?
You can do the constructor function.
Yes, let's add a constructor. And
the super.
Okay, we're going to call super.
And then cats equals an empty object. This dot cat equals this. Okay, state.
How about state?
This dot state, and then your curly.
Yes, and state should always be an object. And now, as you mentioned, like it could be like an empty array to start with, which is totally normal. In fact, we could do that as sort of a mock, basically. So this would be your initial state, and then where would I actually put a fetch request? And that's what we'll mock up here by what we're about to do. What lifecycle method should I use in order to send a fetch request?
Component did mount.
Yes, component did mount. So this is now mocking a fetch request, okay? We're going to use this because this is where this is how it would happen, right? So basically this is fetching the cats, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes. We already have it, right? We imported a file next door. But now what would I do inside of here?
You would do your fetch.
Okay, so fetch the cats. Then turn my response to JSON.
JSON, and then you would do like data or cats.
Then what? Yeah, what goes inside of here? Yep. What would you do with the cats?
Don't you do a this.setState?
Yes, that's exactly what I would do. And set state takes either a function or an object. And if it's just an object, we can say this is the piece of state I want to change, and I want it to be my cats. Okay? So like, you know, www.mycats.com, like that's just silly, whatever. So we're going to mock that up by just saying this.setState. And then I'm going to say I want to change the cats property to be cats. Now I have cats already because I'm importing it directly, but we're still going to mock it up. So this is where we're actually then changing from the empty array to a fully fledged array. And now I can map over that state. Now I'm allowed to map over state here because I'm not changing. Map is not destructive. So this is totally legal. And now I can make a cat card and pass the information I want to each cat card. What's the problem right now? What's missing? What kind of errors are we going to see for sure in our browser at this moment?
Don't you need to reference props?
Do I have any props?
No, actually, you're passing down. Is it a piece of the state?
Yes, I'm passing down basically each member of the cat's array from state. I'm passing to my cat card component right there.
Don't
Mapping over a map. Oops, sorry. Cats. Sorry, cats. Thank you. This .state.cats. So this particular array .map. I'm mapping over it, and for every single cat, for every object that lives in this array, I'm going to create a cat card component, pass down as props the cat, and I'm going to call it cat. Okay. So now what I can do here is I'm saying, hey, JavaScript, grab that variable cat cards and return it. What is cat cards? It's an array now of React components. What kind of component? Cat card component. Now, I'm going to say actually that right now these are not cat card components. Why? What have I not done?
You need to import the cat card.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I must import my children. So I need to import cat card from /, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here because I haven't even defined this thing, cat card. So now let's define it. How should I define this?
So each one is going to display the picture of the cat and then the cat's name.
Yeah, I think so. What kind of component am I building here?
I think that one might be just functional.
Yeah, why not? So let's show it each way. So I'm going to say const cat card equals, and I'll put a question mark there for now. And what do I want to return?
Like cat.url and cat.name.
Well, we have to think in terms of HTML as well. Like what kind of HTML do I want this thing to be?
You want the image?
Okay, I agree with that. First of all, I'm going to choose to make each one of these things its own div. And then I definitely want an image whose source is, and we have to think about that. Before we even do that, let's just see, like, I'll just say a cat. So I don't think I need quotes there. Okay. So first of all, I'll just put like that for now. And should we at least see a cat showing up as many times as there are cats?
You also need to export.
Yep, I sure do. For almost the time, I don't know if anybody has a few extra minutes, we can at least get this thing showing up, and then we'll call it a wrap, and then maybe we'll run an extension on this to add some more functionality. But at least for now, we see 5 cats showing up. That's good news. So for every single one of these things, we have a cat. It's complaining that we don't have an ID or a unique key prop, which we could fix. I could just do that here real quick. I'll say key equals cat.name. You should really use like a database ID or something that's actually going to be unique every time. But for now, that'll get rid of the warning. Cool, so I've got my 5 cats, and now let's talk about what we actually want in here. We set an image and I guess a little p tag or something. Now, how do I actually put a source in here and the cat's name? What does that look like? And how do I sort of get this prop that has been passed down?
So I think we have to destructure the props. So we need to, put props in there, I think. Maybe cat, I guess that's how it's coming in.
Yep. So now what does that do for me if I do it this way? Can I just do this?
Cat.name. I always did it props.cat.name or props.cat.url. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay, so okay, it depends on how we do this, right? Mm-hmm. So if I just do this, okay, and I go back, now I'm going to see cat is not defined. Okay, so then I guess props.name. Will this work?
No, it needs to be props.cat.name.
That's exactly right. So props.cat.name. Did I save it? Is it thinking? Cat is not defined. I don't have cat anymore. Oh, yes, I do. Okay. So now we're, wait, what? There we go. Now we're back in shape. But I like that destructuring. Basically, if I do this, if I console log my props, console log props, I save that, and I look over here at props. Props is going to be an object. An object right now which has one main key of cats. It also has the key, but it has the cat because that's how I've defined it. So a prop called cat is now available to the props object as a property called cat. Is that confusing? I don't know. Maybe the way I said it is. I hope not. But I could also use React to see what's going on here. I can open up my tree here and I get a list of all the components. And when I click on a component, it should show me the props and the state of each particular component. If I further open up and look at a particular component, like in this place, cat card, I see that now we changed to props. Now we changed down to the state and props that each particular cat card has. So we have Fluffy, we have Peaches, et cetera, Spike, Herman, and Moose. So we see those props. I can look at each of these and I can see app actually has no props and no state. Okay, only cats right now, the component has state, and each cat card has props that it's receiving, chunks of that state that are being passed to it. And that's what I'm using to build my cats here. So destructuring basically takes this props object, right? Not what you see here so much, but like the whole thing. The whole thing is an object, which is kind of harder to see here. It's easier to see in the console. That when I console log props, see this entire thing is a JS object. So I can take that thing and destructure it, which means if I use this syntax, this is not React, this is just JavaScript. I can get a variable called cats, whose value is whatever the value of the property cat on this object happens to be. In that case, it's another object which has a URL and a name property, which means now I can simply refer to that variable cat, which is much, much nicer than having to say props.cat everywhere.
And we can call it cat because back in cats.js on line 24, you're saying cat equals the cat object.
Yes, I'm naming the property right there. So now the props object will have a property called cat.
So Cameron, you could have named it Flea, and then you used Flea.
Yes. So here you mean? I could have said Flea here, and Flea here, right?
Okay.
And flee, and like hopefully we're not jinxing any of these cats to have terrible flea problems. But oh yeah, console log props. That's going to be a problem. But now it should still work. Oh, maybe URL of undefined. Oh boy, what's going on? Oh, because I can't just wait. No, I called it flee. What's going on? Flee. Props.flee. Why do we not have props?
Oh, did you get to save it on cats.js?
Thank you.
There you go.
Boy, that had me going for a minute. Oh boy. I didn't see that right away. Thank you. And so now I can choose flee. So basically, if we want to destructure our props, we need to match basically the attribute. It looks like an HTML attribute, which is actually becoming the name of the property with whatever we're trying to destructure on the child side. Okay. And then we have this nice syntax where I can now just refer to these things sort of in a plain fashion. And now I have this nice list of cats. Whatever, I didn't save it again. Same mistake twice. Cool. So this is so we're kind of getting somewhere. We've added a little bit of state, a tiny bit of state. We've mocked a fetch request. We have a parent that's rendering a list of childs first by declaring an array. By the way, I could do this in line. I could grab this code and put it right here. It's usually nice to declare these as consts, and then kind of it's much easier then to see your layout of what you're returning this way. That's my opinion anyway. And then I'm receiving this child, which just has a URL and a name. So I think we're going to have to add another study group on this to sort of finish out our cat Tinder functionality, where we'll need to decide where are we going to build some functions and some callback methods. How are we going to pass those things around? What other components do we need, and what sort of functionality are we going to need to, what functionality are we looking for, and what components and what methods and callbacks do we need to sort of make that happen?
I got a bit confused.
What's that?
I got a bit confused on the cat's component.
Okay.
The cat component.
Yep.
No. Yeah. So what is cat? Like you're setting a cat equal to cat, or cat or key to cat.name.
This one here?
Yeah,
okay.
Inside the curly braces, where is it getting cat from?
So each of these, this cat right here.
Oh, never mind. I just realized because it's a map and it's getting from. Okay, thank you.
Yep, it's coming from each of my cat objects and I'm mapping over. So I'm mapping over this array, which is not very nice to look at right now.
Yeah, I got it. I didn't realize that we're inside a map thing. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Any other closing questions? And don't worry, we'll pick this up and carry it forward. And I'll fix my Create React app on my app program as well. Any questions as we close this up for tonight?
Can you send an example? This is Kevin. I'm the other Kevin.
Yeah.
Send me in an email of the syntax for React for a recursive function.
Syntax in React for a recursive function? What do you mean exactly by that?
Recursion. I'm more of a .NET developer, so I'm familiar with object-oriented, but the syntax is usually what gets me.
Okay.
One of the things that's just a simple. I mean, if you don't understand, that's fine. I'll bring it up in the next class. But
okay.
The thing with the syntax is usually with recursion. Whenever you loop through child nodes and all other kinds of stuff, and the parent, and just write a loop to do that recursively, do you understand what I'm asking, or no?
Well, we're not usually going to step back and like work through the nodes. So one of the things about React, so when we're dealing with the DOM, right, we might have to build functionality around actually being able to walk through and look for all the children and that kind of thing. React takes a lot of that and abstracts it away in the background. All right. So it's unlikely that I'm going to need to put a ton of thought into like, how am I going to reach out and grab all these children? I'm going to build my React app in a way that sort of anything that needs to change and update, React is going to handle that. I don't have to handle that. React handles it. So I don't have to think about when I make a change, what needs to change. Like that's part of the beauty. If you build a JavaScript application where you're writing all the JavaScript on the front end, whether that's all of your JavaScript living in your Rails asset pipeline or a separate JavaScript within a separate application that's running on a different server and still hitting your Rails API on the back end, if you build that yourself, you still have to deal with things like how do you manage your state? How do you change things on the DOM after you've made changes to your backend with the user interface? And one of the most beautiful things about React is that it abstracts away so much of that and just takes that grunt work, right? Takes it away from us. We don't have to worry about it anymore because React is just watching. React sees the relationships that we're building, and it's changing the things that needs to change. So we don't have to do things like, let's make sure we take care of all the children. We don't have to build a function that like walks the DOM and makes sure that it gets all the child nodes recursively and that kind of thing. Now, knowing how to build the walk the DOM function, right? That's a great interview question. But that's vanilla JavaScript, right? That's something JavaScript along with the DOM, of course. No, understanding that structure and knowing how to do that. That's a great exercise, right? It's a lot of fun to sort of handle that kind of thing, and that's a good technical interview question to know. I don't think you're going to have to run into that so much with React. Do I sound like am I way off from what you're talking about, or is that what you're?
I'm just curious. You know, I'm just getting into I've always been, like I said, .NET side, and you know, this is a little bit new. JavaScript's kind of flat, and then now React, I'm seeing you're getting some object-oriented stuff with the extends, and then it's good to see. So that's
right.
Because usually recursion is on that end is like you said, if it does it automatically for you, then it takes a lot of the hassle out.
Yes, and it is. That's one of like the big things about React is taking away extracting away and handling so much of like the updating that has to happen, and handling the relationships between your nodes that you don't have to worry about anymore, which is nice, as well as event handling. Cool. Well, I appreciate everybody's attendance. I'm going to stop my screen share. I'm going to stop my recording, and I will schedule for later this week to add. There we go.